folks, I'm Griffin Lucier, here with another Jund Midrange in Historic video. Today we are going to be going over some new cards from the new Dungeons & Dragons set, and taking a look at what the deck list looks now. It's a format that's kind of like in flux. Had some bannings recently. The Strixhaven and special set that went along with it, whatever it was called, brought in a lot of new stuff, mostly like Brainstorm, Memory Lapse, Lightning Helix. Those are kind of the big ones, but also there's like Faithless Looting too. But Abundant Harvest and Inquisition of Kozilek are some of the ones that we're using. But beyond that, it's a kind of a brand new format ever since Strixhaven came out. And the Dungeons & Dragons set doesn't really do too much to change that, but there are some pretty interesting things that I wanted to look at. So let me go over the list pretty quick. Here is mostly stuff that we've seen before on this channel. 4 Scavenging Ooze and 3 Cheville, kind of my go-to for my 2 drops. It's kind of like the core of the deck is Cheville plus a bunch of removal spells, or Scavenging Ooze and a bunch of removal spells. And you kind of get value when you kill your opponent's creatures. In addition to that, we've got a little bit of a disruption, hand disruption package, and Inquisition and Thoughtseize. Inscription of Ruin makes opponents discard. Kolaghan's Command can make people discard. And we've just got a bunch of removal spells in Inscription, Bonecrusher Giant, Kolaghan's Command, Bloodsheaf's Thirst. So some of the cards we're trying out are Ebondeath Dracolich, and it's been pretty good. One of the problems with this card is that it is double black, which means that you can't play Jegantha, and so that's kind of a big deal. But it's been working out, and as the format gets faster. And things like your mana sinks, utility lands get better. Things like Jegantha become less necessary, because that's kind of what Jegantha is just a mana sink, just kind of like a utility land that's built into your deck. Something that you just have the ability to pump a bunch of mana into in the late game. And so by playing a bunch of mana sinks in your mana base, it makes it so that Jegantha is a little bit less necessary. So having said that, our double colored cards are Ebondeath Dracolich, which I'm playing 2 of, and 1 copy of Arasta of the Endless Web, which is a pretty neat card, specifically against the Izzet Phoenix deck. It makes it really, really hard to win. It's got a lot of toughness, so it's hard for them to get it off the table. And you basically just get to, if they ever get back their Phoenixes, you just get to block and kill their Phoenixes every time. So it makes a lot of 1/2 reach creatures, which just happens to line up really well against that deck. In addition, we've got, a Klothys in the main deck. Kolaghan's Command, I guess I should mention, is another new addition. Because it was part of the Historic Anthology. It's been okay. I think that Kolaghan's Command is the kind of card that gets better when the format has cheaper stuff going on, cheaper smaller creatures. Some of the creatures in this format aren't able to get hit by Kolaghan's Command because they're too big. Things like Bonecrusher Giant. Scavenging Oozes don't last that long as 2/2s. Questing Beast is a big deal. Righteous Valkyrie. So a lot of the creatures don't get hit by this, and then the creatures that do get hit by this are the cheaper things like Llanowar Elves, Soul Wardens, stuff like that. And it's can you pay 3 mana when you're behind or whatever? And it's been okay. So these are all, I'm making complaints about Kolaghan's Command because Kolaghan's Command is really good. It's maybe not tailor-made for this format, but it's still a great card. So having said that, is it worth the slots? That's something that we're kind of keeping an eye on as we go through here. And we've got one copy of Clothis in the main deck. Just a pretty good catch-all answer to either like slow blue decks that have a problem getting it off the table, or graveyard decks. So does a lot of work here. We're also checking out, we've got like a kind of a smattering here of different utility lands. We've got a Not Vold Slumbermound, a Lair of the Hydra, a Den of the Bugbear, and a Castle Lochbane. And so they're all kind of good at one thing or another. I don't really know which one is the best because they're all kind of like good at different things. Specifically, Lair of the Hydra and Castle Lochbane are good at producing green and black mana, which the other ones don't, which is a big deal because it can cast Cheville on turn 2. If you play either turn 1 tap Not Vold Slumbermound, or say Den of the Bugbear on your second turn, because that's like a good time to play it, you don't get to cast Cheville on that second turn. So having said that, it's a possibility that you're going to have to play this on turn 3, or this on turn 3, and it's like, that detracts from it quite a bit because you're not getting off the ground fast enough. That said, Den of the Bugbear has looked really good, and Not Vold Slumbermound is also pretty strong, but I wanted to try to include it because of the new card from the Dungeons & Dragons set that can make a Faceless Haven into a Platinum Angel, but so just like having a way in your 60 cards to get rid of a land seems pretty nice to have, at least. Get myself out of a lock just by having the card in the 60. So, and Castle Lochbane is always good. However, this is a format that's like pretty fast, and so you don't really have a lot of time to both activate the castle and use what you're drawing off of it. And so, if that's the case, then it's possible that Den of the Bugbear is better. But again, Castle makes black, and the Den of the Bugbear is kind of one of the most useless lands as far as mana production. And the Lair of the Hydra is kind of in between. Can pressure planeswalkers. It makes it so that a planeswalker on an empty board isn't a huge deal, because sometimes you can go after it without spending a card to do it. But it is pretty mana intensive, and unlike Den of the Bugbear, doesn't leave behind any kind of value after activating it. Just like the fact that you get a 1/1 creature when you use Den of the Bugbear is a pretty significant deal. In the sideboard, so against the aggressive decks, what I've been doing lately, and it's been working kind of well, is just going up to 4 Chevilles. When Cheville is good, it's extremely good, and so the aggro decks in this format just kind of aren't suited to beat it, especially in the main deck. In the sideboard games, they're going to bring in some answers, but if you draw 2 of them, then it's still fine. You're not really worried about the legend rule because you want to have that security against their Skyclave apparitions and their baffling ends or whatever. Gruul will bring in a braid or lava coil or whatever. So I like to bring in the 4 Cheville, just max out on those, and then more spot removal to go along with your more likelihood to have Cheville. Flunk has looked really good. There's a lot of problematic cards that are indestructible or otherwise tough to get with other removal spells, and when you bring in Flunk, you can expect it to hit and kill basically anything they play. It'll hit any of their early stuff early and their late stuff late. They are going to be decks that are playing out their creatures pretty early, so and playing out their hand pretty early, and so you can expect the 7 minus their hand number to be pretty high. And 1 copy of Shivan Fire, just because it's a nice cheap removal spell, and a couple of copies of a Braid, it's kind of the same thing. They're pretty good, not the greatest. I would play probably 7 copies of Flunk if I was allowed to. I do want to try out Power Word Kill, though, at some point, but a Braid is kind of useful for being versatile. There are some artifacts around that are nice to be able to hit. Against some of the slower decks, we've got Go Blank, Duress, so 3 copies of Go Blank. Sorry about the sideboard formatting here, it's so silly, but Go Blank, Duress, to amp up our discard ability. They are great, against any like Teferi decks, but the Go Blank specifically is really awesome against any of the Faithless Looting decks, and that includes like Kroxa decks or is that Phoenix, because when you cast a Faceless Looting, like, you're going down on cards, and so the Mind Rot ability is a huge deal because you're already down on cards, and now you're really down on cards, and then also you lose like the ability to it exiles your graveyard. It's super good. It's really, really good. Also, there's a lot of like Magma Opus, Torrential Gear Hulk, like Search for Azcanta stuff going on that Go Blank also hits, so that's really nice. And then we've also got a couple of Grakma Skyclave Ravager, just a really good threat against opponents who you expect to have removal for it. One of the things that's an interesting development in the format is that there are like Jeskai control decks that are running Lightning Helix, where before they would more likely be playing Baffling End. And so when that's the case, Grakma lines up pretty well against Lightning Helix. So just kind of a little value threat here when you think that they're going to be attacking, like, using removal on your creatures. Grakma's a pretty nice card to have. And then one extra copy of Klothys to bring in against, more blue decks or more graveyard decks. So, with that, I ran this through 5 matches on the ladder, and let's check out the matches. Okay, so here's the first match. We've got a hand that looks like it's going to be really good if our opponent is playing a creature deck, and then if not, then we're hoping to, draw something more useful, draw some discard spells. The Ebondeath in the deck, in the hand, is interesting at least. Opponent with a Temple Garden, so that seems to indicate some kind of creature situation going on. Thinking that right play here is probably Blood Crypt into Cheville. If our opponent plays a creature that we want to hit with a Bone Crusher Giant, and we draw a Bone Crusher Giant, then it'll give us a chance to play the Slumber Mound. So now we've got an interesting decision here. Trying to decide what land to play. The Dracolich, the Ebondeath, I think I should just call it Ebondeath. It might turn out to be a pretty good game for Ebondeath here because we have a lot of cheap removal spells, and we might be able to set up a situation where Ebondeath can get a block in, and then we can recast it because our opponent isn't super out of the gates here. Plus, green and white specifically aren't red aggro decks are able to just cast a shock or a magma spray or whatever on an Ebondeath, so it's not as useful there. But against green white, it's you can only fight in combat, and Ebondeath trades pretty well. So we could have cast it there, but I wanted to get the Bishop of the Wings off the table if possible. Maybe an interesting thought would have been to cast, leave up my mana, and then if they played this Collected Company, on their turn, we could eliminate the Bishop on their turn or something like that. I don't know. So the opponent has Collected Company, but it's not that good of one. It's pretty beatable here. But you still kind of have to watch out. Speaker of the Heavens can start making angels pretty soon, so we definitely have to watch out, especially because we're going to be casting this Ebondeath anyway. So we have the Eliminate available to hit the Valkyrie if they play maybe a Youthful Valkyrie or something like that. Since they don't, I think we're pretty free to play this Ebondeath. K-Command's a nice one. And so the Ebondeath is going to be able to keep them at a low life total. It's going to be able to pretty much shut off the Speaker of the Heavens. We could have tried to hold it back and into some kind of blocking situation. Did not seem super useful. And then the opponent got rid of a Declaration in Stone as one of the cards they discarded to the inscription there. And so it's just like, man, that was really convenient that the Ebondeath had Flash there, right? Because they had 2 mana sitting around. So the opponent conceded there. Yeah, they were basically just getting beaten down by a 5-2, and if they tried to block, we would just recast it. So what I like to do in this matchup is cut Scavenging Ooze. It just doesn't seem like the battle is ever going to be on the ground. And then this is a matchup where you bring in your Chevils and bring in all the removal you can. Thoughtseize are okay. I don't like Inquisition very much. Some of their most powerful things to do are play Collected Company or 4 mana Ajani, which is, the name is escaping me, but there's a Planeswalker that they play. And those are important to hit with Thoughtseize. And you're basically gonna take those every time if you see one. So I like to cut the Inquisitions because they don't hit the best card. So here's kind of a sketcher. Chose to keep it here. We've got 2 copies of Bonecrusher Giant. Draw any 3rd land, and we've got Inscription and Kolaghan's Command. And if we rattle off a green source here, then we're just really running hot. So seems like a good enough keep. The problem is that Bonecrusher Giant, we don't have a good answer to Bishop of Wings right now. And drawing that second Cheville, probably not the greatest thing. Here I am talking about how great it is to bring in a 4th Cheville, and it's just like, oh yeah, they're not good when you can't cast them. But what's nice is that if you have a Cheville on the table that sticks, you're just so likely to win. So opponent's just on 2 planes so far. Nothing going on really. And a Valkyrie. So now we've got a decision here. Can we play Cheville? Can we really afford to play Cheville here? Thinking about it. I guess I did. But the Valkyrie is really dangerous as well. If they play a second one, then all of a sudden we're way behind the 8 ball. They go right up to 24. The next creature they play is going to make the Valkyrie go off, and we've got, we would be pretty far behind at that point. All of our Bonecrusher Giants and Kolaghan's Command are not removal spells when a Righteous Valkyrie is in play, and they have 27 or more life. So the opponent casts Deck in Stone. So now we got a little conundrum here of what to do. Could play another Cheville, but the problem is if they have another Righteous Valkyrie or a Collected Company into a Righteous Valkyrie, then we're in a lot of trouble because their creatures get +4/+4. So again, mana is tied up. Cheville plus Bloodchief Circe looks pretty good here. Bloodchief Circe on the Youthful Valkyrie. But we just went after the Valkyrie, the Righteous Valkyrie with the inscription there. I think it's the right play. So now what do we do? Well, if the opponent's last card is a land, then they get to start going off with the Resplendent Angel. So I decided I would destroy the Soul Warden and make them discard a card. It's pretty important because if they just played that land and activated the Resplendent Angel, we would be... Once they start making those angels, it turns... becomes very hard to win. Flunk is a great draw. And now we get to get rid of 2 cards, 2 creatures this turn. So we have the choice here. Do we go after this Resplendent Angel, or do we go after the Righteous Valkyrie? The Righteous Valkyrie is not going to get up to 27 life this turn. So if that's the case, maybe the answer here is to go after the Angel. Didn't have to do it in response or whatever, but... Opponent has a Soul Warden. We're going to play 2 creatures. Here's the Cheville. Now we finally get this Cheville into play. Opponent has seen enough. Kind of an early concession, but I think we were getting that one, so... yeah, against the Angels deck, it's not always, like, it doesn't always go that well. That's, like, what you want to see. But we didn't even really get a Cheville trigger, I don't think, that entire match. So, you know, definitely could be better. They had answers to the Cheville. But, lots of removal spells. They're basically just a creature deck, and you can just, yeah, play a bunch of removal spells and kill them. It is a really dangerous deck, though, because if they are able to get under you, if you have a slow hand, like, you need to have answers for their threats, or else, like, it doesn't take too much for them to really just, like, go over the top and get you. So, alright, so that is the first round. Let's go to the second round. Okay, here is the second round, looking like a no-lander. And then this looks awkward. But going to 5 is really tough. Thinking about getting rid of a Harvest here. The problem is that we need double black to cast basically either of our spells. Kind of a rough one here. So we got Spirebelf Canal into Faithless Looting. Don't have any copies of Scavengers or Clothis in sight, so not to mention we're not, like, in any way. Oh, there's a news. It doesn't look like we're going to be, like, racing them at all. Another question is, do we play the Crag? Or do we try to play Harvest again? I think my plan here is that if they are able to, like, flash back the looting and put a Phoenix in their graveyard, we can eat it with the Ooze. Looks like they're making a pretty aggressive play by doing that. So there's a lot of lands that we could have drawn there to make it so we could play Ebondeath next turn. But that wasn't one of them. There weren't very many in the deck that don't. I think getting rid of that, like we could have tried to play like an ooze. So Cheville is interesting. I'd like to be able to exile as much stuff as I can while I have the ooze. They have a lot of answers to it. Magma Sprays and Pillar of Flame is usually what they have for answers to it. So if that's the case, leaving 1 green mana available to eat that Dorat and go up to 3 mana or 3 toughness starts to look pretty nice. So in response to the pillar, go after the Dorat. I don't know what it is. Sprite Dragon? I just call it Dorat when they have it like this. The Godzilla card is so weird. So that's a lot of cards they just had to spend on the ooze, which also, at the same time, kind of did its job. So now the question is: do we play Cheville or do we play this Bloodchief's Thirst on the Dora on the Sprite Dragon? So we went with Cheville. So it's a Demi-Lich. Now that's a new card from the new set, and it looks very good here. Definitely going to have to kill that, although they can just kind of recast it at will at this point. So, kind of an untenable situation here. They're going to be able to like recast Demi-Lich pretty easy. I think they just need a blue source here or Faithless Looting. So this is the first time I've played against Demi-Lich, and I want to get that out of the way, let you know that. This is pretty crazy animation there. I want to let you know that because I'm about to make a pretty bad attack right here. And I was not aware that Demi-Lich doesn't have flying. Here I am reading it. But I still thought I had flying. So, like, leading back to Cheville, you're kind of halfway there to stopping it. They're going to get a free card out of the deal, but I wanted to get in for my point, I guess. Pretty bad. Doesn't look great. One thing to know about Dracolich is that they do have to spend mana to make it work, so. To be able to play the instant or sorcery, they have to actually spend mana on the card. But now we're just called to the Arclight Phoenixes, even though we tried to gain a lot of life this turn, or this game with the Cheville. So, didn't get there in that game. Honestly, didn't do too bad considering how bad our hand was. But here we're going to bring in the Go Blanks and the Clothis. So lots of Graveyard Hate. And the Graveyard Hate is like, it's better than just like, you know, a Grafdigger's Cage or a Nile Spellbound would be. It's like, it shuts down their graveyard and like does something else. Like Clothis closes the game out and gains too much life. Go Blank makes them discard their hand, and so you know, Scavenging Ooze also like gains you life, closes out the game. So our answers, like, they have the ability to play a straight up game. They don't have to be playing, you know, you can just cast a Demi-Lich and have a 4/3. They can just cast a Sprite Dragon and attack you to death. They can, you know, lots of times they're going to have Stormwing Entity. So you have a lot of stuff to deal with and not just the graveyard stuff going on, even though the graveyard stuff is like kind of the point of the deck. So it's nice that our Graveyard Hate cards are incidentally doing other stuff in the match as well. Trying to figure out our mix here of removal and Chevilles and what we want, you know, because some of their stuff is, you know, the Demi-Lich, Sprite Dragon, like, you want to be able to get rid of that stuff with removal spells, but, like, removal spells are kind of, like, only okay. You got to figure out what you want to hit and, you know, which spells to keep in the deck. Hand looks pretty nice. A Knight on 1, a Cheville on 2, and potentially Go Blank on 3. Opponent with a really nice start. We drew our third land, which is great. We get to play the Hydra on turn 2, cast Cheville with it, Blooming Marsh on turn 3, just like we drew it up. If that had been done to the Bugbear instead, we wouldn't have been able to play the Cheville that turn. So could have gotten the free value here. You know, Bone Crusher Giant plus Thoughtseize also looks like a pretty good play. But with 2 Arclight Phoenixes in the graveyard, it's just like, why even allow yourself to like just run into that, you know? Thoughtseizing this expressive iteration would have looked really good as well. But yeah, you gotta, what can you do? Opponent missed the land drop there. So we're kind of in the clear here. Get to start going off the Cheville. They don't have an answer to it. None of that stuff in their hand. I mean, Ops and Brainstorms, you don't really know. They can be anything, but the Dorat doesn't look especially threatening with the Inscription in our hand. And Finale of Promise, while it's not that good right now, it can be. Like if they draw another land and opt here, then all of a sudden they're like Finale of Promising for an Expressive Iteration and an opt, and it's just like that's a lot of cards. I think the thing to do here is, well, first of all, the Lair of the Hydra makes you, like, you got to watch out for auto tapper more now than ever because of the creature lands. So I would have been casting a Bone Crusher Giant there instead of pumping the Knight, but instead the auto tapper took both of my red mana sources, so gotta watch out for that. I think my opponent just scoop here. I forget. Nope. So they got a Faithless Looting and a Demi-Lich in their graveyard. Seems like Scavenging Ooze is going to be really nice here. Go ahead and get rid of that Looting and the Demi-Lich afterwards. So that's about it for that. So in the sideboard after game 2, I ended up bringing in a couple of copies of Flunk. In this matchup specifically, you can expect them to have like a lot of cards in their hand. That's kind of their whole thing, is they just play a bunch of these card draw spells. So Flunk might not be at its best, but at the same time, all of their creatures have pretty low toughness between the Sprite Dragons and the Phoenixes. And you do actually, like, it sucks, but you do actually need to use removal spells on the Phoenixes from time to time. So, and then in a pinch, you can get rid of a Demi-Lich. So all stuff we need to take care of. This hand looks okay. I don't have any graveyard hate, but we do have 2 copies of discard spells plus Harvest to try to dig for something. Now we've got 3 discard spells. This is probably kind of obvious, but you usually want to lead with Inquisition if you have both Inquisition and Thoughtseize. I only play 1 Inquisition because I think it's a lot worse than Thoughtseize. But if you have it in your opener, you want to play it before Thoughtseize, because if your opponent has, like, say if my opponent had like a copy of Search for Azcanta and also some like 4-drop I wanted to hit, then I would be like in trouble, because I would have to have taken the Search for Azcanta so they don't play it on turn 2, and then the 4-drop I really wanted to Thoughtseize away is gone, and the Inquisition misses it. So it's pretty important that you play Inquisition first when you get the chance. So here is Arasta, and if we get Arasta onto the table, that would be fantastic. So I'm trying to figure out how we can do that. The opponent has 2 Arclight Phoenixes in hand and a Faithless Looting that they didn't cast. So that's a little scary. What I'm doing here is kind of offering up Scavenging Ooze as bait, I think. Perfectly good chance to just have a Magma Spray or whatever. And they can't, like, let the ooze sit around. Like, they have to use a removal spell on it. Hopefully it's at a time when they don't want to. So Expressive Iteration might be really good for them here. We'll see. Like, if they draw Faithless Looting, and have another another cantrip, then those phoenixes get to go to the graveyard, and then that would be pretty bad for us. So they have a land drop to make here. Let's see what they do. So they pillar the ooze, which is bad, but it's better than them having the Faithless Looting to get those phoenixes into the graveyard. So now we got a Rasta out, and we're going to be making some spiders. The Overgrown Tomb was a really good draw for us. Bone Crusher's nice. So, if I'm being totally honest, I went into the tank quite a bit here, trying to figure out what I want to do with my Kolaghan's Command. Forgetting that Pillar of Flame exiles the ooze, so I really didn't have that much in the way of options anyway. I think if I had to do this again, I would Thoughtseize and then decide if I'm using Kolaghan's Command or Bone Crusher Giant to kill this thing. Doing this play, though, this is also fine. Getting the Bone Crusher Giant out there is pretty nice, but yeah. In hindsight, I'm not sure what the right thing to do was. So here's a Finale of Promise. Finale of Promise by itself, if you get it off for the full amount, will get Arclight Phoenixes back onto the battlefield. But I mean, Arasta just shuts down all the Phoenixes. The problem is we can't attack yet. Nope, they've got reach, so you don't want to be doing that. Inscription looks nice. Get rid of those last two cards. Two really good cards. So our opponent here can like attack with a Demi-Lich, cast Finale of Promise, get, cast like a Brainstorm and a Pillar or something like that. They can do a bunch of stuff here. It doesn't look like they have a good way to get rid of Arasta. And since that's the case, they're going to be making a lot of spiders. The other part of this whole equation is that by exiling all their instants and sorceries, it's going to make their Demi-Liches worse, both because it can't flash anything back, and also because there's not any more instants and sorceries in the graveyard to cast the Demi-Lich with. They have to exile. I think it's 4 instants and sorceries from their graveyard to make Demi-Lich work. So we can kind of line up an attack here. It's not great. By attacking maybe with Bone Crusher Giant and the Errasta, we can set something up where they double block the Errasta with a Demi-Lich and a Phoenix, and put the other Phoenix on the Bone Crusher. And then we get to Kolaghan's Command the Phoenix that way. It's just a little too risky. If they do anything else, then we're kind of in trouble. Like if they put all 3 creatures on the Errasta, then we're kind of screwed. But here we get a nice play where we get to make them discard their card on their draw step, and then get back Bone Crusher Giant. Of course, we got auto tapped again. Really cool. Opponent with not such great attacks here. And I guess they just don't see a way through the Errasta. I mean, we've got another answer for their Phoenix here, and then our creatures can start swinging. So Errasta, yeah, like it's a 1-of, so you're not going to draw very often or whatever, but man, it looked really good there. And Go Blank, super good. They had a really dangerous start, and Go Blank just shut it down completely. So we've built a lot of incidental graveyard hate into this deck, and it's really important that you have it, I think, for the metagame right now. The Izzet Phoenix deck is super powerful. Like, they just basically get around all of your points of interaction that we would normally be using. So just building in a bunch of exiling, graveyard exiling stuff is really nice. So if you were taking this deck out for a spin, I would try to not cut any of the graveyard hate if possible, and that I like the stuff like Go Blank, Clothis, Scavenging Ooze. I like that stuff a little bit more than I like Soul Guide Lantern and Grafdigger's Cage and stuff like that, just because you also just want to be able to win a fair fight, and so those cards do both. So, with that, let's go to the third match. Alright, so this is the third match. Pretty solid hand. This is something that makes Knight of the Ebon Legion better than... Like, I like to kind of classify it as if it was like a 2-drop, even though it's not. Kind of because you don't always like want to play it on turn 1. You got like Harvests and Thoughtseize and whatever. But also, like, it is a more mana-intensive card than most 1-drops are going to be. Having said that, just like having a nice turn 1 aggressive play is, it's great to have in your opening hand. Knight of the Ebon Legion is good when you draw it early, good when you draw it late. 2 Botanical Sanctums from the opponent, so don't know what that's like at this point in the match. You don't really know what that is, but Pelt Collector seems to indicate some kind of aggressive deck here. Primal Knight too, so Cheville looks like it's going to be really great. I think I have seen this in the past. There's a card from Strixhaven called... I don't remember. 2 mana instant, and it's basically Spell Pierce, Prey Upon split card. I forget what it's called. But, so I have seen a deck that's like this before. Kind of a mono green deck, but splashes blue for that thing. So, Cheville should be really good. Played a Rasta here. And looking back, I don't know how much I like that play. Could have played Kolagon's Command instead and gotten rid of their elf. Maybe like Kolagon's Command plus Harvest would have been a good turn. One thing, of course, don't fall into the trap of being like you have to use Kolagon's Command as an at instant speed. You don't. So you can cast Kolagon's Command whenever you want. You can do it on your main phase. Lots of times it's right to do it on your main phase. I think what I should have done there in hindsight is just play Kolagon's Command on my main phase. And so the trouble with this play is that they're going to respond with Collected Company. And now I've used a Bloodchief's Thirst that could be used for a big creature on a small creature. So alright, so we inscription the creature there and get in for some damage. Garrick's Harbinger is really scary. It's hard to get off the table because it's got 3 toughness, so you can't Bone Crusher Giant it. And so you have to block it. And you can't target it with Cheville's ability. So we're in trouble if they try to attack. So 4 mana left up, you know, what does that indicate? But I want to use my mana this turn, and we can get back the Knight. The Knight is also a nice blocker for the Garrick's Harbinger. So got another company coming. Old Growth Troll. So that's a new one from Strixhaven. I could cast Eliminate right now on the Scavenging Ooze, but alternatively we can wait and hit it with a Cheville counter. They can't really attack me because of the Knight. So here's Ronus. This is a tough one for us at this point. Ronus creates a lot of problems. Learn no mistake. Alright. So just drawing some lands. Ronus is still going to be trouble. They have two 4-power creatures. Doesn't have trample, but I chose not to block. Gonna put Cheville counter on the Old Growth Troll. Still no action. Question is, do we want to be able to activate this Knight 3 times? 2 times is usually enough, but maybe they're gonna have like Primal Might or something. Decided it wasn't worth the 2 mana. So here's a real great play. Don't worry, we're gonna be fine. You're watching this and being like, don't do that, don't do that. But this is the time when I learned that Ronus has Death Touch. So we threw that Knight away. The thing is, I think even with the Knight, I was still kind of screwed in this game. But them attacking with the Ronus opens up a big Hydra attack here. So it makes it so they have to chump block. I think like at this point, the only thing I can really do is race. Good thing about playing against Ronus is that Ronus itself does not have trample, so kind of get to dodge one there, but another Old Growth Troll for the opponent. It's not looking great. So there's two things going on, right? Like, one is that I don't like when I cost myself a match or cost myself a game or whatever, punt away a game, and I'm like, well, and then also at the same time like lament how bad my draws were or whatever. But like, okay, so we've got like a million lands to our opponent's 5. That's pretty unfortunate. Also as unfortunate is that I'm a dummy and threw away my Knight of the Ebon Legion. So it's not super constructive to be like, I lost this game because I drew 6 more lands than my opponent. It's kind of more constructive to be like, I lost this game like for a reason, for my own reason. Having said that, at least it softens the blow of the misplay a little bit to know that like I wasn't winning this game really anyway. Not to mention, just like the Ronus is just, if we could cycle through removal spells with Cheville, like draw a removal spell, draw a card off of Cheville, use that removal spell, keep cycling through, which is what Cheville is in the deck for, then we might have been okay, and then just gotten rid of all the non-Ronus creatures, and then just won with the leftovers. It's possible, like, you can do that, but it's also like, that, not to mention that Old Growth Troll is just like really good. It was a really good card, but with all those lands it wasn't happening. Sure would have been nice to have a Knight of the Ebon Legion on the table, but whatever, what can you do, right? So in come all the removal spells and the extra Cheville. We're going to take out pretty much all the slow stuff. Discard spells, are okay. The Thoughtseizes can hit a Collected Company or a Ronus. And I got rid of the Erasta and one of the Ebondeaths. I thought Ebondeath might be good. Trades against all of their old growths and their Steel Leaf champions. And trade against some other stuff too. Pretty nice late game card, you know. Something like Ronus is going to be like attacking every turn, so every turn you can trade and then, or you know, block and then get back the Ebondeath. So thought it would be okay, even though it's a little slow. This hand looks great. We've got Knight, we've got Cheville, and we've got Flunk that actually deals with Ronus, so we're not that concerned about it anymore. I mean, still concerning, still a great card that you got to deal with, but. Definitely playing Cheville on turn 2 anytime you get the chance. Three mana for Barkhide Troll. And we're going to Primal Might down. Primal Might down our Knight, which is fine. Let's Bone Crusher the Slanor Elves. Now do we want a Bloodchief Sith the Barkhide Troll? Maybe. We have an extra copy of Flunk. Seems like it would be a good time to do it. It's also kind of a nice time to get Den onto the battlefield. I think I decided that I was probably only spending 3 mana next turn anyway. So maybe we could get the Den on the battlefield next turn. And whether it's casting this Bone Crusher or casting Kolaghan's Command, we weren't going to be, like, doing too much. So here's Garrick's Harbinger. Again, gets around Cheville. So this is nice. It gives us a chance to trade off this Bone Crusher Giant. I mean, there certainly could be some kind of trick. In fact, it kind of did seem like there was going to be a trick here, being honest. So I guess I made a safe block using Cheville's Death Touch here. Not to mention that, like, fairly likely that on 4 mana they're just going to say go, and that we have this extra copy of Cheville. So it could harvest here. Could also just hold up Flunk mana, even though I'd much rather be using it with Cheville counters. I'm thinking is at like 4 damage. Like the Old Growth Troll is going to be a 2-for-1 if we block. So it's like we're not in a rush to trade off. We're going to be gaining 3 life a turn now. So taking 4 isn't really a big deal. Now the question is, do we hit the Steel Leaf? Or do we hit the Pellet Collector? So that sequencing looks pretty bad. I wanted to draw a card and then decide what I wanted to do with Harvest. Because getting more lands is also kind of useful. So when I drew the land, then I was like, okay, now I want spells. But then I drew the spell that would have been like a better thing to use on the Pelt Collector. So it's kind of silly. But it's fine. It kind of works out here. And now it's like, well, I guess I just go upstairs because I want to cast it next turn. Kind of got nothing else going on. And so now with 2 Chevils in my hand, it's like, well, let's just trade off and start casting more. Ooze looks like it's going to be good. In this kind of matchup, like, an Ooze on the table that survives is really great. Really awesome. So, I also was today years old when I learned how Old Growth Troll works. I think I like just pumped this like directly into the sun. I think you can, with the Old Growth Troll's trigger on the stack, I think you can exile it with the Ooze, and I just like didn't. Maybe that's a turn from now. Maybe that's maybe I'm foreshadowing. So they're in a tough spot here. I can use the instant speed removal spell to get out of this if I want to. So right here, I'm supposed to use my Ooze when this is on the trigger, or on the trigger's on the stack. So you know, just playing really, really well. Just seeing all the angles. Things are going great. If you ever needed, like, you know, if you ever needed to be convinced of how good Cheville is, I won this match. So, if Cheville can save me, then it must be, like, really, really good. Because I had no business winning this match, given how terribly I played. That's okay. This is why we play. This is why we trying to learn these new cards. They've only been out for 30 months. Or in Ronus's case, like 4 years. Okay, fair enough hand. The mana is fine. We got some removal. We got an Ooze. Do we go Slumber Mound, or do we play Tomb and have Harvest available, or do you just play Overgrown Tomb just 'cause? Because we want to be playing a Flunk next turn, or potentially want to be playing a Flunk next turn, or potentially we just want to be playing Cheville next turn, because just, you know, why not just draw perfect? So now with Shiv and Fire. This makes me want to get a red source into play. And so it's tough because, okay, so now here's a Ronus. So I was going to flunk the Pelt Collector on end step, but now I don't want to, because flunk is kind of the only answer to Ronus that's any good. So now it's like, well, I guess I have to just waste this 2 mana, and I kind of should have played Scavenging Ooze, but you kind of never know. So Cheville draws us a card. Now I'm thinking I want to flunk. So we can Thought Seize here. Second Ronus in hand is rough. And we can't cast Flunk on the Ronus yet. We could in response to this Collected Company if we wanted to. But that's okay. Waiting on a removal spell is not the biggest deal in the world because, you know, if you wait, then you get a Cheville trigger. Alright, so now we're talking. We got a 5th land, we can Inscription Deck hand away. We can flunk the Ronus. Get our Cheville trigger. Trade off a Cheville later if we want to. Also, what's cool about Flunk is that it makes it so Pelt Collector doesn't trigger, because its last known information when it dies is that it was a -2/-2. So, Pelt Collector doesn't become a 4/4. It's kind of one of the little tricks. Do we want to trade off a Cheville? We got an extra one in hand. We're also just going to be like able to make an ooze that's enormous. Opponent is thinking about doing stuff on our upkeep. I don't exactly know what. So play our second Cheville. I think the play here is just like put ooze up to a 4/4 and hold back to block. No company for the opponent. Maybe a bluff? But that's not a bluff. So, in spite of my best efforts, yeah, we were able to take that one. Cheville, again, pretty awesome against these aggressive creature decks. They have, like, all these creature decks in Historic are really interesting in that they have the ability to roll out, like, powerful threat after powerful threat after powerful threat. But in doing so, it's like they don't have really any other play. They don't have a ton of answers to stuff like Cheville. This deck played Primal Knight, which is a really bad card against Cheville. You just 2-for-1 yourself. Having said that, like, you know, sometimes it's actually your best option. Kind of Declaration in Stone is also 2-for-1 yourself. So, again, yeah, these Historic aggro decks, lots of times, just the way they're built, they don't have a ton in the way of ability to get rid of a Cheville. So when a Cheville sticks, it's just lights out. And think that, you know, that first game in this match was really showcased the power of Ronus from the green decks, and not very many people, or like not very many decks can afford to play that, but these like mono or almost mono green decks can do that. But Cheville was just too strong. All right, let's go to the fourth match. Okay, match number 4. Hand looks good. Problem is, if we want to play Slumber Mound, we need to decide. Like if we want to play Stomp on turn 2, we need to decide on turn 1 if that's what we're doing or not. We're playing either Slumber Mound or the Overgrown Tomb on turn 1, and then the Lair on turn 2. So it's like, if that's the case, probably going to be better to just play the Cheville. I mean, what's nice about it is that, like, if you really want to get that Bone Crusher Giant, if you really want to cast Stomp on turn 2, Cheville into Stomp is, like, also really good. Whereas Stomp into Cheville is kind of worse, so. And so that was actually another point here. I should have probably played the Lair first and used that for the for the Abundant Harvest, but I was not 100% sure if I was playing the Slumber Mound or the Lair on turn 2, and so then it's like, well, I drew this Thoughtseize and I want to cast it, so by doing that, I made it so that the Lair is going to come into play on tap, or come into play tapped, and the Slumber Mound is also going to come into play untapped. Now the opponent has Silver Quill Silencer on Stomp, so I'm not going to cast Stomp on the Silencer. So let's just play a 4/3. Footfall Crater seems to indicate to me that they're playing a Death Shadow deck. I guess up until then you could kind of just be like, oh, well, it's a Mardu, Lurrus kind of mid-range thing. But Footfall Crater specifically is like, kind of goes well with the Skyclave, Scourge of Skyclave, and the Lurrus also kind of indicates that. Sign in Blood is probably, things that make you lose life are nice for Death Shadow. So, anyway, now we're kind of doing business here. If they're spending their mana on the Knight, then we can get in for some damage here and have it look like we're holding up removal spells. The thing is that like an Eliminate would have been really good in this spot because we could block, they pump, we eliminate, whatever. And then just like eat 2 things with Scavenging Ooze. But instead we have Ebondeath. However, I still kind of think it's right here to just block and make them use their mana. Which is what I did. Given that they're at 10, it's like Death Shadow is a weird thing. They have Death Shadow in their deck. Getting like incidental damage on them, like getting them down to 3 or whatever, it's not that good. Like you want to get them dead. So we were able to. I think that is actually 10 damage there. 3 ooze activations. So, yeah, if you like, oh, well, I got my Death Shadow opponent down to 3, well, all of a sudden they can play 10 10s. So you don't want to do that. You want to be able to, like, kind of knock them out all at once. You, like, the critical points are, like, don't get them below 13. And then once they're at 13, you got to get them to 0. You don't want them hanging around 6 or 7 or whatever. So the Ebondeath looked good. Looks like they have a lot of instants and sorceries, so maybe the Erastas will be good. Unless Past Griffin took it out. Took out the Ebondeaths, even though it looked pretty solid there. But they're a little slow. The Death Shadow deck's pretty fast. Plus it's actually like, against Death Shadow, it doesn't actually trade. Like Death Shadow and Scourge of Skyclaves are bigger than Ebondeath. But the Clothuses look good. I like Clothus against pretty much anything with Lurrus in it. And the Grakmas look good because they're going to be playing just spot removal spells. Conventional wisdom is you take out your point discard spells against other mid-range decks. That's not always the case, but you just want to be able to draw action if you can. And late in the game, Thoughtseize is it's pretty lame draw when your opponent doesn't have cards in their hand. So while your opponent might be, drawing their Death Shadows and whatever's, and you draw Thoughtseize, and you're like, oh man, I wish I had taken this out for some kind of answer to Death Shadow. Alright, maybe Clothis isn't that good. I guess I took it out, but I don't know. I also had 62 cards and I like them all, so I guess you gotta make cuts. This hand looks good. you know, everything we want. Pretty good mana. You want to have, like, in a Thoughtseize Mirror, having a spell-heavy hand is very nice. Like, they can take out our worst spell, but we still have 4 left. Silver Quill on Cheville. So if that's the case, I guess we're probably casting Abundant Harvest. Okay, got the Errasta. So we have a plan. That's a good plan, too. They Thoughtseized the Ooze. Then, also, by the way, that's a... We still haven't seen the card Death Shadow yet, but I'll just take 1 for my If Near Deadlands on end step. That's a pretty good indication. The Ooze seems to be problematic for them because that's what they took with Thoughtseize. So I guess then you could assume that Ooze is picking up Ooze in the command looks pretty good. There's a Knight and a Silver Quill. What's a Silver Quill going to name? Tough call for him, right? Because the inscription on their last 2 cards looks pretty good here. Rasta looks pretty good. Ooze looks pretty good. Sign in Blood put themselves down to 8. Yeah, I think the thing to do here is go after the Silver Quill. If we can draw land, then we get to cast the Inscription as well this turn. Starts to look pretty nice. There is a land. I think the thing to do here is probably attack. You want to attack, even if you're not... You want to attack before you spend your mana. You have to be able to threaten the +3/+3 with the Knight. Decided to leave up the Scavenging Ooze activation. I don't know, in hindsight, if that's right. A deck like this is pretty likely to have Kolaghan's Command, even though they didn't have red mana at the time. But also, like, there's a chance that they could be playing something along the lines of, like, Claim Fame. So, I don't know. So, not a ton to learn from this match. We just had pretty good draws. The opponent was kind of stuck on 2 lands there, and, you know, in the first game, we just kind of tempoed him out a little bit. The deck is pretty low to the ground, and that's, like, you know, we want to have, like, Ebondeath, Errasta. These cards are really good, but we want to have, like... We just want to make sure we're not getting out-tempoed, and that's hard to do against something like Death Shadow, right? They're a mid-range deck, but they're also just, like, super cheap cards. You know, Death Shadow, Knight of the Ebon's Legion, Thoughtseize, all that stuff. They're getting to the board usually faster than you, so to be able to keep up, and this is something that I learned playing, like, against Grixis Death Shadow and other Death Shadow decks in Modern, is that, like, you're going to be fine if you can keep up. You know, as long as you're not getting your stuff, your cheap stuff discarded, or your 2-mana creatures dealt with for 1 mana, and then you have to spend like 3 mana to deal with their Death Shadow or whatever. As long as you're not getting out-tempoed, then you're probably going to be okay. And so, Death Shadow, you know, Historic Mardu Death Shadow isn't like, you know, one of those decks that you're like gunning for or whatever, but there are a lot of these decks where you just want to make sure that you're not they're not getting under you. So there's a lot of powerful stuff going on in the opponent's deck, and you just need to be able to try to keep up. So that was 4 rounds. I had one more match, so let's check it out. Okay, here we are for the fifth match of the video. Cheville, Thoughtseize, eliminate Bone Crusher Giant, good mana, great hand. Opponent's on Kahira. What's nice about this is that with Thoughtseize in your hand, you don't really have to guess too much, but that could mean either this deck, which is like a Bant ramp kind of thing, or it could mean like a creatureless control deck. Both of those are pretty like representative of the format. So the thing is, Inquisition against this Brainstorm in the opponent's hand isn't going to be very good, right? I would love to just go ahead and Inquisition the Narset, or maybe even the Krasis. I don't know. It kind of depends, but they can just Brainstorm with that open mana and not worry about it. So we get to Inquisition them here, and they don't have any more lands. So the thing to do seems to be to take into the north? Then we get to Bone Crusher the Narset, attack the Narset, draw a card with Cheville. So the opponent's got a lot of powerful stuff in their hand, but it's not the hugest deal. Because we've also got some cool stuff going on. However, that looks a lot like they might be able to cast their Nissa next turn. They do need another green source to do it. So if that's the case, how are we beating this Nissa? So Shark Typhoon for 2 is interesting. And then, oh yeah, I remember now. This is a game that this happens. So we were okay, and now we're pretty dead. We had enough on, like, you need to have enough on the board. The way to beat Nissa, and we haven't had to do this as much because Nissa used to be like a 4-of in the most popular deck in the format. Now it is just kind of still a really, really powerful card, but just doesn't seem to be like in what people are doing as much these days. The way to beat Nissa is like without just having a Maelstrom Pulse or a Bloodchief's Thirst, is to have a big enough board and use a removal spell on the land with the plus encounters, and then attack her. And so when you know a Nissa is coming, you kind of just have to flood the board with as much stuff as you can, so that like you really don't want the opponent to be able to untap. You saw what happened when their opponent untapped there and cast a Hydra Crisis for 6,000. So that said, going to sideboard here, 6 months ago, we would have definitely been leaving the Scavenging Oozes in order to beat Uro, because that was like the biggest deal. And the Clothuses, like you would bring in the Clothuses, the Go Blanks would have been really good. But instead, with no Uro, we're always just like worried about the board. There's Shark Typhoons, there's Nissas, there's Crasises, and lots of times they run Yasharn, and then there's the Kahiras to worry about. So it's basically just a Bant, like, good stuff deck, but they have Into the North, so they have a pretty significant mana advantage as well. This hand is okay. Go blank isn't really the best thing here. It's kind of our only way to, like, fight a card advantage fight. I mean, not our only way, because we have Inscription of Ruin as well, but the Mind Rot effect, even though it's not, like, that great, you know, against, like, Nissa is basically just like a 12 for 1. Like, what are we doing, like, fighting these little fights here? But it does help. It's tough for them. I was able to Thoughtseize away the Brainstorm. The Brainstorm is, like, in a weird way, like, kind of good, but kind of not good against the Mind Rots that we play. But looking at their mana, it looked like they weren't going to be able to memory lapse the Go Blank because they had to play a land that came into play tapped. So since that's the case, I was able to take that Brainstorm, so they couldn't, like, put back their good cards, discard their bad stuff. So now we're like, okay, if they want a Wrath, they can. They have memory lapse mana available. Could play the Knight, but then there's Wrath. So I want to try to get them to a place where they feel like they need to Wrath the get them to a place where they feel like they need to Wrath the Bonecrusher Giant by itself, and then we can play the Knight. As long as they can only use Wrath of God for a 1-for-1, then we're okay. So, concocting a plan here. The thing to do, I decided, was make them discard and deal 2 to the Nissa. Puts it at 4, so that next turn we can untap, eliminate the breeding pool, and then attack the Nissa for 4. However, the opponent discarded their memory lapse to the Kolaghan's command. So it's like, well, if that's the case, then I don't need to worry about doing the trick on my upkeep. I would have, on my upkeep, eliminated the breeding pool. They memory lapse it, then I just draw it again, and then draw it for my turn. But looking back, that's way too fancy, because then the breeding pool would have just been tapped. So I could attack. That's okay. I think it still might have been the right play. So now they got Yasharn. We get to attack, deal some damage here. Play Cheville. So the thing about this play is that it really kind of forces them to play the Wrath. If they don't, then they're kind of in trouble. And they decided not to. They decided they were going to try and fight. So now I'm going to just play the Bonecrusher Giant. And now it's like, okay, we have 2 creatures and they have 1. Well, they're probably going to want to use the Wrath of God. If they do, then we get to draw a card. Opponent plays Into the North. Notably, did not go find a copy of Faceless Haven there. I think that's interesting that they just don't have any. There's the 4th Cheville, so doing great. You can try to go blank their card out of their hand. However, if it's memory lapse, then this looks really bad because we're just going to draw a go blank again against an opponent with no cards in hand. Having said that, we like that they wrapped away a Cheville. That's good for us. Okay. And another seal away. So we did end up getting to use all the copies of Cheville. That's great. Never punished. And there's the Faceless Haven. So it's interesting to me that they didn't just go get that with their Into the North. Because I think you can do that. Right? You can do that. So can you do that? You can do that. Yeah, snow land card. Put on the battlefield. You can go get, Scrying Sheet, Mouth of Ronan. Opponent top decked Hydra Crisis, which is really, really good. But we have Inscription of Ruin. And this is a really cool trick. If you have a Cheville in play, you can get back a second Cheville with Inscription of Ruin, kill the creature. If you go top row with Inscription, you can kill the opponent's creature and get your Cheville back. You have 2 Chevilles on the battlefield, but it's fine because they'll both trigger. Both copies of Cheville will trigger when the creature dies. So that was awesome. We get to basically cast our own copy of Hydra Crisis. We gained a bunch of life. We made them discard a card. We killed 2 creatures. We drew a card, or we drew 2 cards. Pretty sweet. Notably, I did want to mention that, when Inscription of Ruin came out, I was doing that, all the time. Pretty often, I was using Inscription for all 7 mana with a kicker. I haven't done that very often lately, getting up to 7 mana. I think the opponent shame concedes because they walked into a Lair of the Hydra there. But even playing the Ebondeath, I think we were doing okay. It's going to be really hard for them to attack into the Ebondeath, and we could attack with our Lair for a bunch. So alright, so we're going to game 3. Opponent is on the play. He looks fine. Not the greatest. But about what we can expect. Usually we'll play Knight on turn 1 instead of a Thoughtseize. However, the time you might want to change your mind on that is if your opponent is playing either Into the North or potentially Search for Iscanta. Don't think they're playing Search, but could have tried to play around that. Could have tried to play around the Into the North there and get them, make them play fair on mana, but I don't know. There's a lot to be said about getting the Knight on the table. So took the Shark Typhoon. It's the most powerful card they have. Card that we kind of have the most problems with. Especially because we drew the Grakmaw. So now the Wrath is a lot less dangerous to us. And so here's an interesting play. You play your land and you attack, and I did not expect the opponent to block here, but they did. Which is scary, because it indicates to me that they want to play a Nissa next turn. And just be like, I'm going to make my opponent use their mana. So there's a Foretell card, which I think is the Doomscar, but you don't actually know that for sure. Could be a number of things. Could be like Alrund's Epiphany, which would probably be really good in their deck. I don't know. Alright, so there's Kahira. And what's nice is that we get to... Grakma gives you the ability to kind of overextend a little bit. Like, I'm not afraid of that Doomscar anymore because I'm still going to get a token back when Grakma dies. So, I'm cool with, like, clearing the way, attacking with creatures. If they want to use the Seal Away, then we're fine with that too. We can pump with the Knight. We still have, like, a pretty nice plan here. Gonna hopefully force them to just use the Doomscar on the Knight by itself. That is the goal. So now the Doomscar is gone, we can flood the board a little bit to try and, you know, build a little board presence in case they draw a Nissa. Because it doesn't look like we're going to draw, you know, it doesn't look like we're going to have a answer to it. So we could have played the Knight there. Possible that that was the thing to do. But again, like, we know they have Doomscars and Wraths in their deck. So there's potential for another sweeper, especially because they kind of just, they didn't, I wouldn't call it spewing it off, but they did, like, go ahead and trade 1 for 1. Cast Go Blank. Again, Go Blank not looking really good here. But Castle Lochthwain sure is. So, we do have a Blood Chief's Thirst back in case they draw Nissa. And I drew this Inscription of Ruin, and I was like, you know what? I think they have Shark Typhoon in their hand. And it turns out they did. So, that's cool. And the card they were gonna draw was Nissa, so dodged a bullet there. And we've got a nice answer. So, Inscription coming up really big here because it's just a way that, like, you get to get a bunch of value in the late game that you otherwise wouldn't. Alright, I'm going to pause the video. Do you see the play? So, the opponent's at 10. We have 5 damage on the board, or 5 power on the board. This is a trick that comes up super rarely, but it might come up more often. I'm not really sure. It might come up kind of often in Historic because there's going to be more games where you get up to this much mana. If you're ever playing with Raging Ravine, you can activate it twice. You can be like, pay 2 a red and a green, activate my Raging Ravine, and then pay 2 a red and a green again. And then Raging Ravine's ability that says whenever this attacks, it put a postal counter on it. That happens twice if you do that in the same turn. So when you go to attack, it'll make 2 postal counters. So the same thing is true with Den of the Bugbear. So, activate it again. Make 2 1/1 tokens that are tapped and attacking. And we got them for Xaxes. So, that said, I think that's a really hard matchup. Their deck is full of just super powerful threats. Everything in the deck is like You know, Nissa, you gotta, even if you answer it, they got a 2-for-1. Narset, even if you answer it, they got a 2-for-1. Shark Typhoon, Kahira doesn't even cost them a card. Yasharn is a 2-for-1. So, and like their removal spells are wraths. So, it's a really hard deck to play against, and I'm surprised, I guess I would say, that we emerged victorious from this match. However, you know, drawing those inscriptions at the right time was pretty clutch. But just like I said in the last match, baking in some, you know, the things that we've seen like a smattering of, I guess not like all the decks that you're going to expect to see in Historic, but like all of the themes of the things that you want to build your deck to try to be good against. We saw cheap aggressive decks that you need to like keep up with. We saw the Is It Phoenix deck that has a bunch of graveyard synergies that is really nice to bake in some graveyard hate into your deck. We saw the Death's Shadow deck that is like a mid-range mirror deck that is trying to get under you, and so keeping your mana costs low, but low enough to contend with them, but also high enough so that your cards are still powerful. That was really key there. And then in this matchup, it was like adding a bunch of like value lands. Inscription has like a variable mana cost and variable amounts of power. Bone Crusher Giant does like a lot of different things and can turn into a nice 2-for-1. We have all of this like baked in value just from like, you know, drawing a certain land, drawing a Castle Lockthwain or a Den of the Bugbear or whatever. And cards with kicker like Bloodchief's Thirst or Inscription of Ruin. So things that can scale up in power when you need them to, and things that can just be cheap when you need them to too. So it's a pretty good cross section of the format, and those are kind of the goals that I have in mind when I'm building the deck and tuning the deck. So that was 5 rounds. Let's go back and check out the deck one more time and wrap it up. Okay, so to wrap up here, this is the deck, and we saw just about everything come into play in those 5 matches, and it was just the ladder in Platinum, but I think all my opponents played better than I did, so I don't want to take anything away from them. It seemed like a fair enough smattering of good decks to play against there. I do like the creature lands look great. This is the perfect deck for creature lands. Like I said, you get to put a little bit of value just into your deck by making your mana, just by making your land drops. So having a little bit extra of that effect has really helped. I do like the Ebondeath and the Erasta. The Erasta isn't new, but what is new is taking Gigantha out of the deck. So I do like the Ebondeath, though. I think it's pretty good. In this slot, alternatively, you can play Chandra, but Chandra's phenomenal, but double red is probably the hardest color to get, and it's also like your 4-drop is kind of the worst card against Memory Lapse. And so Ebondeath is a card that's much harder to cast a Memory Lapse on because it has Flash. So it's nice that if you're going to have an expensive card, it's good against Memory Lapse. And Erasta is a card that is like not good against, I guess, the card Memory Lapse, pretty good against Memory Lapse decks, against control decks. So, and, you know, you can kind of expect to get like some immediate value out of Erasta in that kind of matchup. So Another card that we've played in that slot in the past is Asika's Chariot, which is really good as well, but there are a lot of people playing Prismari Command, which happens to line up really nicely against the Chariot. So, even though it does leave you, you know, if they Prismari Command your Chariot plus one of your cat tokens, it does leave you with one of the cats left over, but I think it's still probably not worth it. Even though Ebondeath itself is not really phenomenal against Prismari Command or whatever, but it does give you a little bit of extra lasting power. And how good it is against Teferi is just kind of is pretty great. So, having said that, is it worth playing the Ebondeath over, say, Chariot or maybe like Thragtusk in that slot, or even just like no 4-drops and just like more removal spells? I'm not 100% sure, but I like what it's been doing so far. And Ebondeath is another card that's like, I think that this card takes practice to play correctly, too. How you want to navigate combat and when you want to cast it, and even like how you want to play your lands to try to make sure you don't, give away that you have it and stuff like that. All of that kind of comes into play a little bit with Ebondeath, and so it's a card that if you're interested in it, I would practice with it. It's like easy to make mistakes, like block against something, and then, oh, whoops, I didn't really think about how I was going to have 4 mana available. I would really just like recommend like casting it a few times and trying to get, like, wrap your head around how to play it before you decide if you like it or not. Additionally, Kolaghan's Command was pretty good, but I'm still not sold if I like this or Maelstrom Pulse more. I think in that last match that we played, Maelstrom Pulse would have been a lot better, and possibly some other ones throughout the 5 matches. Although Kolaghan's Command, like, there just so happens to be also enough cheap little creatures that like Kolaghan's Command was pretty reasonable. It is like if you're just like hitting a creature like a Grizzly Bear, Kolaghan's Command is going to be way better than Maelstrom Pulse. But there's a lot of times where you'd rather have Maelstrom Pulse, and Kolaghan's Command just kind of sits in your hand dead when your opponent kills you with like a Shark Typhoon or something like that. So, or a Planeswalker. So, if that's the case, like if you're running into situations where you want more removal for big stuff, then I would cut the Kolaghan's Command and play Maelstrom Pulse. Outside of that, I like the curve. I like the creatures. I like the sideboard plans that we have between Cheville, bringing in lots of removal and just like gunning removal spell after removal spell, and then going into the go blank plus hard to kill creatures and threats. So that's the deck for now, and I'm going to keep working on it. If you get a chance, you can check out my blog, jundlife.blogspot.com. And I am still streaming on Twitch, but I also want to start streaming on Discord. I don't really know how I'm going to do that or whatever, but anyway, so that about wraps it up for me. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate it. I'll see you next time.